Chapter 1. The Invitation to Thornfield Manor. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's modest sitting-room. She sat in her favourite armchair, a delicate teacup balanced. In her hand, her knitting needles resting on the table beside a half-finished scarf. The village was quiet, save for the distant hum of a lawn-mower and the occasional chirp of a sparrow. It was, Miss Marple thought, the sort of day that invited reflection, or perhaps interruption. The interruption arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, in the form of a crisp, cream-coloured envelope delivered by the postman. Miss Marple sat down, her teacup, and adjusted her spectacles, noting the elegant calligraphy on the front. It was addressed to her, and the return address bore the name Thornfield Manor, Kent. The name stirred a faint memory, something about an old estate, grand, but shadowed by whispers of scandal long ago. She slit the envelope with a letter opener and unfolded the thick paper within. The invitation was written in a bold, looping hand. Dear Miss Marple, you are cordially invited to a weekend gathering at Thornfield Manor, hosted by Lady Beatrice Langley, from the 15th to the 17th of May. Your presence is requested for an occasion of particular significance, the details of which will be revealed upon your arrival. A car will be sent to collect you at noon on Friday. We eagerly await your company. Yours sincerely, Lady Beatrice Langley. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Particular significance, she murmured, her eyes narrowing. How very vague. She turned the invitation over, but there was nothing more. No hint of the occasion, no list of other guests. Yet the tone, polite as it was, carried an undercurrent of urgency, as if Lady Beatrice had chosen her words with care. She rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at the neat rows of roses in her garden. Thornfield Manor. Yes, she remembered, now. The estate belonged to the Langley family, once prominent but faded in recent decades. Lady Beatrice, the last of the line, was known for her eccentricity and her collection of rare artefacts. There had been a story, years ago, about a theft, or perhaps a betrayal, tied to the family. Miss Marple's memory, sharp as ever, could not quite pin it down, but the invitation intrigued her. It was not the sort of thing one sent to an elderly spinster from a sleepy village, unless there was a reason. Jane, you're wool-gathering again, she chided herself softly, returning to her chair. She picked up her knitting, but her mind was elsewhere, threading together possibilities. A gathering at a grand manor, a mysterious occasion, and Lady Beatrice Langley, whose reputation preceded her. It was, Miss Marple decided, worth a weekend to uncover what lay beneath the surface. The telephone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She set aside her needles and answered it, her voice calm and measured. Miss Marple speaking. Jane, dear, it's Dolly Bantry, came the cheerful voice of her old friend. I've just had the most peculiar invitation from Lady Beatrice Langley. Thornfield Manor, of all places. Are you going? Miss Marple smiled faintly. I've received one myself, Dolly. I confess, I'm rather curious. Oh, you must go, Mrs. Bantry exclaimed. Beatrice is an odd duck, you know, always rattling on about her treasures. They say she has a jewellery box that's locked tighter than Fort Knox, and no one's seen inside it for years. I wouldn't be surprised if this occasion has Something to do with it. A jewellery box? Miss Marple's interest sharpened. How intriguing. Do you know anything about it? Only rumours, Mrs. Bantry said airily. Some say it's cursed, others that it holds a fortune. But you know how people talk. Anyway, I'm going, and I insist you come too. It'll be like old times, sniffing out a mystery. Miss Marple chuckled. You make it sound like a holiday. Dolly, very well, I'll go. But I suspect this weekend will be anything but ordinary. They chatted a little longer, and when Miss Marple hung up, her eyes returned to the invitation. A locked jewellery box, a grand manner, and a gathering of strangers. She had seen such things before, and they rarely ended in mere pleasantries. Her fingers brushed the paper, and she felt a familiar prickle of anticipation. Whatever Lady Beatrice was planning, Miss Marple would be ready. On Friday, at precisely noon, a sleek black car arrived at her gate. The driver, a taciturn man in a crisp uniform, loaded her small suitcase and opened the door for her. As they drove toward Kent, Miss Marple gazed out at the rolling countryside, her mind already at work. Thornfield Manor awaited, and with it a puzzle she was determined to solve. Chapter 2. The Guests and the Locked Box. The car wound its way up a gravel drive, flanked by ancient oaks that seemed to whisper secrets as the wind stirred their leaves. Thornfield Manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad stone facade both grand and forbidding, like a dowager duchess who had seen too much. Miss Marple stepped out, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, and took in the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. The air carried the scent of damp earth and roses, but there was something else, a faint undercurrent of unease. A butler, stiff as a starched collar, greeted her at the door. "Miss Marple, Lady Beatrice is expecting you. This way, please." Inside, the manor was a study in faded opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleamed dully above a marble staircase, and portraits of stern-faced Langleys gazed down from the walls. The butler led her to a drawing-room, where a fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across polished mahogany and heavy velvet curtains. A small group had already gathered, their voices a low hum of polite conversation. "Jane, you're here!" Mrs. Dolly Bantry waved enthusiastically from a settee, a glass of sherry in her hand. "Come, meet everyone. It's quite the crowd." Miss Marple smiled and approached, her eyes scanning the room. She had a knack for cataloguing people as neatly as a librarian sorting books, and this group promised to be a fascinating collection. Lady Beatrice Langley stood by the fireplace, a striking woman in her 60s, with silver hair swept into an chios elegant chignon. Her emerald green dress shimmered, but her eyes, sharp and restless, betrayed a mind at work. She turned to Miss Marple, extending a gloved hand. "Miss Marple, how delightful! I've heard so much about your perceptive nature." "You're too kind, Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "Your invitation was most intriguing." "Oh, I do hope so," Lady Beatrice said with a cryptic smile. "This weekend will be memorable, I assure you." Mrs. Bantry gestured to the others. "Let me introduce you. This is Mr. Victor Crane, the art dealer." A lean man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and a pencil-thin moustache, nodded curtly. His fingers toyed with a gold pocket-watch, and his eyes darted toward Lady Beatrice with barely concealed impatience. "Charmed," Mr. Crane said, though his tone suggested otherwise. And here's Miss Clara Duval," Mrs. Bantry continued, indicating a young woman in a chic Parisian dress, her auburn hair cascading in waves. Clara's smile was dazzling, but her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "She's a singer, quite famous in London, I'm told. Only in certain circles," Clara said lightly, her French accent softening the words. "I'm here for inspiration, shall we say?" Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Clara. Inspiration, or something else? The girl's eyes flickered toward the door, as if expecting someone. "Over there is Dr. Ernest Hargrove," Mrs. Bantry went on, nodding toward a stout man with a bushy beard, polishing his spectacles with a handkerchief. "He's a historian, specializes in antiques." Dr. Hargrove looked up, his face brightening. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. Thornfield's collection is extraordinary. Have you seen the Ming vase in the hall? Priceless." "I haven't yet," Miss Marple said, "but I look forward to it." The final guest stood apart, leaning against a bookcase with a glass of whisky in hand. "And this," Mrs. Bantry said, lowering her voice, "is Mr. Julian Royce. Well, I'm not sure what he does. Something in finance, I think." Julian Royce was tall, with dark hair and a sardonic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I manage investments," he said smoothly, "and occasionally indulge Lady Beatrice's whims." His tone carried a hint of mockery, and Lady Beatrice's smile tightened. Miss Marple noted the undercurrents, the strained politeness, the sidelong glances. These were not friends, she thought, but players in a game yet to be revealed. Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, drawing attention. "My dear guests, thank you for coming. I've invited you here for a purpose, one that will become clear tonight. But first, allow me to show you something extraordinary." She crossed to a small table covered with a velvet cloth and whisked it away, revealing a jewellery box of exquisite craftsmanship. It was no larger than a bread box, made of ebony, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, its surface carved with intricate vines. A heavy brass lock gleamed at its centre, unyielding and cold. "This," Lady Beatrice said, her voice low, "is the Langley jewel box. It has been in my family for generations, locked since my grandmother's time. No one living has seen its contents." A murmur rippled through the room. Mr. Crane leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Is it true it holds the Langley sapphire?" he asked. "They say it's worth a fortune." Lady Beatrice's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, or perhaps it holds something far more significant." Clara tilted her head. "Why show it to us now? Why not open it?" "Because," Lady Beatrice said, "the key has been lost for decades, but I believe one of you may know more about it than you let on." The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire suddenly loud. Miss Marple's eyes moved from face to face. Crane's avarice, Clara's unease, Hargrove's curiosity, Royce's amusement, and Mrs. Bantry's wide-eyed excitement. Someone, she thought, was not what they seemed. "Dinner will be served at 8, Lady Beatrice said, breaking the tension. "Until then, make yourselves at home." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered by the box, her fingers brushing its smooth surface. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something else. A weight to it, not of wood or metal, but of secrets. She glanced at Lady Beatrice, who watched her with an unreadable expression. "Jane, what do you make of it?" Mrs. Bantry whispered, sidling up. "That box gives me the creeps." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "It's certainly intriguing, Dolly, and I suspect it's only the beginning." She turned away, but her mind was already at work, piecing together the first threads of a mystery that promised to be as complex as the box itself. Chapter 3. Whispers of Sin dinner at Thornfield Manor was a lavish affair, served in a dining room that gleamed with candlelight and silver. The long mahogany table was laden with roast pheasant, glazed vegetables and crystal decanters of wine, but the opulence did little to ease the tension among the guests. Miss Marple sat quietly between Mrs. Bantry and Dr. Hargrove, her eyes moving from face to face as she sipped her soup. She had always found dining rooms to be excellent theatres for human nature, and tonight's performance was already proving rich. Lady Beatrice presided at the head of the table, her emerald earrings catching the light as she spoke of Thornfield's history. "The manor has seen its share of triumphs and tragedies," she said, her voice carrying a practised melancholy. "But the Langley jewel box is perhaps its greatest enigma." Mr. Victor Crane, seated across from Miss Marple, set down his fork with a clink. "You keep teasing us, Lady Beatrice. If the box is so important, why not force it open? Surely a locksmith could manage." Lady Beatrice's smile was icy. "And ruin a priceless heirloom? No, Mr. Crane. The box will be opened properly, with its key, or not at all." Miss Clara Duval, twirling a wine-glass, leaned forward. "But why invite us? You said one of us might know about the key. That's a bold accusation." "Not an accusation, my dear," Lady Beatrice replied. "A suspicion. The key disappeared, under curious circumstances. I have reason to believe it's closer than we think." Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in Clara's eyes, quickly masked by a laugh. "Well, I've never seen it," Clara said, "but I'd love to know what's inside. Jewels, love letters, a curse?" Her tone was playful, but her fingers tightened around the glass. Dr. Hargrove cleared his throat. "If I may, Lady Beatrice, the box's craftsmanship suggests it's from the late 18th century, possibly French. Such boxes often held more than jewels, documents perhaps, or secrets of a sensitive nature." "Secrets," Mr. Julian Royce drawled from the table's end, his voice laced with amusement. "How delightfully Gothic. Next you'll tell us it's haunted." Mrs. Bantry, ever eager, leaned toward Miss Marple. "What do you think, Jane? Could it really hold something scandalous?" Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft. "People often lock away what they wish to forget, Dolly. But secrets have a way of slipping out." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Miss Marple's attention wandered to the undercurrents. Crane's impatience, Clara's nervousness, Royce's mockery, each betrayed a motive, however veiled. She excused herself after dessert, citing a need for fresh air, and slipped into the corridor, her steps silent on the polished floor. The manor was a maze of shadowed hallways, and Miss Marple moved with purpose, her ears attuned to the slightest sound. She paused near a half-open door to the library, where low voices carried through the gap. She recognized Clara's soft accent and Crane's clipped tones. "You're playing a dangerous game," Crane was saying, his voice tight. "If she knows about the letter, we're finished." "She doesn't know," Clara hissed. "And you'd better keep your mouth shut, Victor. We agreed. No risks." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her expression serene, as if admiring a nearby painting. A letter, she thought. Tied to the box, perhaps, or something else entirely. The voices dropped lower, and then footsteps approached. Miss Marple glided to a nearby alcove, pretending to adjust her shawl as Clara emerged, her face pale. Crane followed, his jaw set, and they parted without a glance at her. Miss Marple waited until their footsteps faded before returning to the drawing room. Mrs. Bantry was there, chatting with Dr. Hargrove by the fire. "Jane, you missed the most delicious pudding," she exclaimed. "Where did you wander off to?" "Oh, just stretching my legs," Miss Marple said airily. "Old houses are so full of stories, don't you think?" Dr. Hargrove nodded eagerly. "Indeed, I was just telling Mrs. Bantry about the Langley scandal of 1890. A young heiress, Eleanor Langley, vanished after a ball here. Some say she stole the key to the jewel box and fled with a lover. Others, well, they say she never left the manor." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "How fascinating! And the box was locked after her disappearance?" "So, the story goes," Hargrove said. "The family never spoke of her again. A sin, they called it, whatever that means." "A sin," Miss Marple murmured, her mind turning over the word. She thought of Clara and Crane, their whispered argument, and the box's unyielding lock. Sins, she knew, were rarely singular. They had a way of tangling with greed, fear, and betrayal. As the evening wound down, Lady Beatrice rose, her gaze sweeping the room. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll discuss the box further. Sleep well, my friends. Thornfield has a way of stirring the imagination." Miss Marple retired to her room, a cosy chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the moonlit gardens. She sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, but her needles remained still. The manor was quiet now, but she sensed a restlessness beneath the surface, like a storm gathering strength. The jewel box held more than treasures, she was certain, and tomorrow she would begin to unravel its secrets, one whisper at a time. Chapter 4. The First Clue. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Thornfield Manor's breakfast room, casting long shadows across the table laden with silver trays of eggs, kippers, and toast. Miss Marple sat near the window, a cup of tea in hand, her eyes quietly observing the guests as they drifted in. The air was crisp, but the warmth of the room did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that had settled over the group. Mrs. Bantry was already there, buttering a scone with enthusiasm. "Jane, you must try these preserves, straight from the manor's orchard," she said, oblivious to the undercurrents around her. Miss Marple smiled. "They look delightful, Dolly." But her attention was elsewhere, fixed on Mr. Julian Royce, who had just entered. He moved with a casual grace, but there was a tightness to his jaw, and his eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting an interruption. He took a seat opposite Clara Duval, who was picking at her plate, her face pale and distracted. "Rough night, Miss Duval?" Royce asked, his tone light but edged with something sharper. Clara's fork paused mid-air. "I slept perfectly, thank you," she said, her smile forced. "And you?" "Oh, I never sleep in strange houses," Royce replied, pouring coffee. "Too many creaks and shadows. Makes one wonder what's lurking." Miss Marple noted the exchange, her fingers resting lightly on her teacup. Royce's needling was deliberate, and Clara's discomfort was palpable. She filed it away, her mind turning over the whispered argument she'd overheard last night between Clara and Victor Crane. Lady Beatrice entered, her presence commanding as she swept to the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice bright but her eyes watchful. "I trust you're all rested. We have an exciting day ahead." Dr. Hargrove, buttering toast with scholarly precision, looked up. "Will we be discussing the jewel box, Lady Beatrice? I'd love a closer look at its carvings, possibly Rococo influences." "In due time, Doctor," Lady Beatrice said, her smile enigmatic. "But first, I've arranged a tour of the manor's grounds. The gardens are quite spectacular." Miss Marple sensed a deflection. Lady Beatrice was stalling, perhaps to gauge her guest's reactions. But why? She glanced at Victor Crane, who was unusually quiet, his fingers drumming on the table. His gold pocket watch lay beside his plate, and she noticed a faint scratch on its surface, a detail that hadn't been there yesterday. As breakfast ended, the guests dispersed, some to the gardens, others to the library. Miss Marple lingered, pretending to admire a vase of roses near the sideboard. Crane was the last to leave, slipping his watch into his pocket with a hurried motion. As he stepped into the hall, something small fell from his coat, a folded piece of paper landing unnoticed beneath a chair. Miss Marple waited until the room was empty before retrieving it, her movements swift but unhurried. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the hurried script. "Meet me at the Folly Midnight. Bring the key. No mistakes this time." The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was elegant, with a slight flourish. Feminine, perhaps. Miss Marple tucked it into her handbag, her mind racing. The key to the jewel box, or something else? Crane's agitation suggested he was involved, but the note's tone implied he was not the one in control. She joined Mrs. Bantry in the gardens, where the group was admiring a labyrinth of neatly trimmed hedges. "Jane, you're missing all the fun," Mrs. Bantry called, waving her over. "Mr. Royce was just telling us about his adventures in Monte Carlo." "Exaggerations, I'm sure," Royce said with a grin, though his eyes lingered on Crane, who stood apart, staring at the horizon. Miss Marple smiled politely. "I'm sure they're fascinating, Mr. Royce, but I find gardens far more revealing. They show what someone chooses to cultivate and what they hide." Royce raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Clara approached, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. "It's chilly out here," she said, her voice strained. "I think I'll go inside." As she passed, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of something glinting at Clara's wrist, a bracelet with a tiny charm shaped like a key. It was delicate, almost ornamental, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing. Could it be the key to the jewel box, or was it merely a coincidence? "Jane, you're awfully quiet," Mrs. Bantry said as they strolled toward a rose arbour. "What's on your mind?" "Oh, just the beauty of the morning," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "And the way people reveal themselves, even when they don't mean to," Mrs. Bantry laughed. "You and your riddles. I swear, you see more in a glance than I do in a week." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her thoughts were anything but. The note in her handbag was a thread in a larger tapestry, one woven with secrets and sins. Crane's nervousness, Clara's bracelet, Royce's probing remarks. They were pieces of a puzzle, and the jewel box was at its centre. She would need to watch closely tonight, especially at the Folly, wherever that might be. As the group returned, To the manor, Miss Marple glanced at the towering oaks, their branches swaying in the breeze. Thornfield was a place of beauty, but also of shadows, and shadows, she knew, were where the truth often hid. Chapter 5. The Midnight Disturbance. The clock in Miss Marple's room chimed 11 as she sat by the window, her knitting untouched in her lap. The manor was cloaked in silence, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. Outside, the gardens lay silvered by moonlight. The distant folly, a small stone pavilion nestled among the oaks, barely visible. The note she'd found in Victor Crane's possession burned in her mind. "Meet me at the folly midnight. Bring the key." She had no intention of venturing out herself, but she was determined to keep watch. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and positioned her chair to afford a clear view of the garden path. Her eyes, undimmed by age, scanned the shadows. She had seen too many secrets unravel in the small hours to believe midnight meetings were innocent. The jewel box, with its unyielding lock, was at the heart of this, and tonight might reveal who held the key, or who sought it. At 11:30, a faint rustle drew her attention. A figure slipped from the manor's side door, moving swiftly toward the gardens. The silhouette was slim, feminine, and the moonlight caught a glint of auburn hair. Clara Duval, Miss Marple's. Lips pursed. Clara's bracelet, with its key-shaped charm, had lingered in her thoughts. Was she meeting Crane, as the note suggested? Minutes later, another figure emerged, this time heavier, with a hurried gait. Victor Crane, unmistakable in his tailored coat. He glanced over his shoulder before disappearing into the trees. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her shawl. 2 players in motion, but were they allies or adversaries? She waited, her breath steady, her mind alert. The clock ticked toward midnight. Then, from the direction of the folly, came a piercing scream, sharp, female, and laced with terror. It cut through the night, followed by a crash, like glass shattering. Miss Marple rose, her heart quickening. But she remained at the window, knowing haste could obscure more than it revealed. Lights flickered on in the manor, and voices echoed in the halls. Miss Marple slipped into her dressing gown and stepped into the corridor, where Mrs. Bantry was already bustling toward the stairs, her hair in curlers. "Jane, did you hear that?" she gasped. "It sounded like murder. Let's not jump to conclusions, Dolly," Miss Marple said calmly, though her eyes were sharp. "But we should see what's happened." They descended to the entrance hall, where Lady Beatrice stood in a silk robe, her face pale but composed. Dr. Hargrove was there clutching a candlestick like a weapon, and Julian Royce leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. Clara stumbled in from the garden, her dress torn at the sleeve, her face streaked with tears. "Someone attacked me," she cried, collapsing into a chair. "At the folly. I didn't see who. It was too dark." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "What were you doing out there at this hour, Miss Duval?" Clara hesitated, her hands trembling. I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk." "A walk?" Royce said, his voice dry. "At midnight? In a strange garden?" "Leave her be," Dr. Hargrove interjected, kneeling beside Clara. "She's had a fright. Can't you see she's shaken?" Miss Marple observed silently, noting Clara's flushed cheeks and the way her eyes avoided Royce's. Where was Victor Crane? He had followed Clara, yet he was conspicuously absent. Lady Beatrice turned to the butler, who had appeared bleary-eyed. "Fetch Mr. Crane and check the drawing-room. The jewel box is there." The butler nodded and hurried off. Moments later he returned, his face grim. "Mr. Crane is in his room, ma'am, claiming he never left. But the drawing-room, the jewel box is untouched, but a window's been smashed." A murmur rippled through the group. Miss Marple's mind raced. A smashed window suggested an attempted theft, or a staged distraction. She glanced at Clara, who was now sipping water, her composure returning too quickly for someone truly terrified. "Let's all go to the drawing-room," Lady Beatrice said, her voice firm. "I want to see this for myself." The group moved as one, the air thick with suspicion. The drawing-room was as they'd left it, save for the shattered window, its jagged edges glinting in the lamplight. The jewel box sat on its table, serene and unyielding, its lock intact. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, landing on a small detail. A shard of glass near the table, dusted with a fine white powder. Talcum, perhaps, or something else. Victor Crane joined them, his hair dishevelled, his tie askew. "What's all this?" he demanded. "I was asleep until the butler banged on my door." "Convenient," Royce muttered, earning a glare from Crane. "Enough!" Lady Beatrice snapped. "Miss Duval, you're certain you saw no one?" Clara nodded, her voice small. "It was too dark. I heard footsteps, then someone grabbed me. I screamed and ran." Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone gentle. "And the folly, Miss Duval? Did you notice anything unusual there before the attack?" Clara blinked, caught off guard. No, just the pavilion. It was empty." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming, but her mind catalogued the hesitation. Clara was hiding something, and Crane's claim of staying in his room was dubious. The note, the scream, the smashed window. It was a tangle of threads, but one was beginning to stand out. Lady Beatrice locked the drawing-room door. "No one touches the box until morning," she said. "We'll discuss this further then. Now, back to bed." As the group dispersed, Mrs. Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, this is getting positively sinister. Do you think someone tried to steal the box?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Or perhaps they wanted us to think so." She returned to her room, her thoughts whirling. The white powder, Clara's story, Crane's absence, they were pieces of a larger picture. She settled by the window again, her eyes on the folly, now silent under the moon. Someone had taken a risk tonight, but for what? The key, the box, or something far darker? Miss Marple knew one thing. The truth was closer than ever, and she would not rest until it was unlocked. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The morning after the midnight disturbance dawned grey and heavy, with clouds pressing low over Thornfield Manor. The guests gathered in the morning room, where a modest breakfast of tea, toast, and fruit awaited. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and the jewel box, still locked in the drawing-room, seemed to loom over them all. Miss Marple sat near the window, her knitting in her lap, her eyes moving quietly from face to face. She had seen fear and guilt before, and both were present now, coiled like snakes beneath the polite chatter. Mrs. Bantry, ever irrepressible, broke the silence. "Well, I barely slept a wink after that scream. Clara, you poor thing, how are you feeling?" Clara Duval, pale but composed, managed a wan smile. "Better, thank you. It was a shock, but I'm fine now." Her fingers toyed with the key-shaped charm on her bracelet, a gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. Victor Crane, seated across from her, was less convincing. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hand shook slightly as he poured tea. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Screams, smashed windows, someone's playing games." "Games?" Julian Royce raised an eyebrow, his tone sardonic. "I'd say it's more like a hunt. For that key, perhaps." His gaze flicked to Clara, who stiffened. Lady Beatrice, at the head of the table, set down her cup with a delicate clink. "Enough speculation," she said, her voice firm. "The box is safe, and no harm was done. Let's focus on enjoying the day." Dr. Hargrove cleared his throat, eager to shift the mood. "Lady Beatrice, you mentioned the Manor's history yesterday. I'd love to hear more about the jewel box. You said it's been locked since your grandmother's time?" Lady Beatrice's smile was tight, but she nodded. "Yes, since 1890 to be precise. It was my grandmother, Eleanor Langley, who locked it. She was a troubled soul." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the name. Eleanor Langley, the heiress who vanished, as Dr. Hargrove had mentioned. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "Troubled, Lady Beatrice. That's a curious word. Might I ask what happened to her?" The room fell silent, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her fingers brushing the emerald ring on her hand. "It's an old story," she said at last. "Eleanor was young, beautiful, and headstrong. She was to marry a wealthy suitor, but there was a scandal. A lover, they said, someone beneath her station. The night of a grand ball, she disappeared. The jewel box was found locked the next day, and the key was gone. Some believed she took it and fled. Others thought she met a darker fate." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "How dreadful! Do you think she's still out there, Jane?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. I think the past has a way of lingering, Dolly, especially when it's locked away." Dr. Hargrove leaned forward, his historian's curiosity piqued. "The box was locked after her disappearance, you say? That's significant. Boxes like that were often used to hide compromising documents, letters perhaps, or proof of an indiscretion." "Or a sin," Royce added, his voice low. "That's what they called it, wasn't it? Eleanor's sin." Clara's cup clattered against her saucer, drawing every eye. "Sorry," she murmured, flushing. "I'm still jittery." Miss Marple observed her closely. Clara's reaction was too sharp for mere nerves. Was she connected to Eleanor's story, or was something else at play? The note Miss Marple had found, "Meet me at the Folly midnight. Bring the key," suggested a modern conspiracy, but the past was clearly woven into it. Lady Beatrice rose, smoothing her skirt. "Let's move to the library," she said. "I have some family records you might find interesting, Dr. Hargrove. Perhaps they'll shed light on Eleanor's story." The group followed, but Miss Marple lingered, her gaze falling on Crane. He was staring at Clara, his expression a mix of anger and fear. As he passed, She caught a faint scent. Talcum powder, the same as the white dust she'd seen near the smashed window. Her mind filed it away. Another thread in the growing tapestry. In the library, Lady Beatrice opened a leather-bound album, its pages yellowed with age. "These are letters and photographs from Eleanor's time," she said, spreading them out. One image showed a young woman with striking features, her hand resting on a familiar ebony box, the jewel box. Clara inhaled sharply, then covered it with a cough. Miss Marple, standing nearby, pretended to adjust her glasses, but noted the reaction. "She was lovely," Miss Marple said softly. "And the box, it's unmistakable." "Yes," Lady Beatrice said, her voice distant. "It was her pride and joy, until it became her curse." Royce, lounging by a bookshelf, picked up a letter. "This mentions a betrayal," he said, scanning it. Eleanor wrote to her brother, saying she'd been betrayed by someone close. No name, though. Pity. Miss Marple's mind turned over the word. Betrayal. It echoed the tension among the guests, the whispered argument she'd overheard between Clara and Crane. She approached the album, her fingers brushing a letter half tucked beneath a photograph. It was in Eleanor's hand, the same elegant script as the note she'd found. A single line stood out. "The key is my salvation, but it will damn another." She slipped the letter back, her expression unchanged. The key, then, was more than a tool. It was a weapon, perhaps, or a confession. And someone in this room knew more than they admitted. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on Clara, who was whispering to Crane in a corner. Their heads were close, their voices urgent. Mrs. Bantry joined her, oblivious to the drama. "Jane, this is like a novel. Do you think Eleanor's lover stole the key?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, "but I suspect the truth is closer to home. Families, you know, have a way of keeping their secrets close." She returned to her room, the letter's words echoing in her mind. Eleanor's sin, the locked box, the missing key, they were bound together, and the guests were entangled in it, whether they knew it or not. Tonight she would watch even more closely. The shadows of the past were lengthening, and Miss Marple was determined to bring them into the light. Chapter 7. The False Confession. The afternoon at Thornfield Manor was cloaked in a damp mist that curled around the estate like a shroud. The guests had gathered in the drawing-room, where the jewel box sat on its velvet-draped table, its ebony surface gleaming under the chandelier's light. The smashed window from the previous night had been boarded up, but the memory of Clara's scream and the thwarted theft hung heavy in the air. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes missing nothing. Lady Beatrice stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid. "Last night's events cannot be ignored," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. I want answers." Victor Crane shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching toward his pocket watch. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're treating us like criminals over a broken window." "Not just a window," Julian Royce said, his tone sharp. "An attempted theft, Mr. Crane. Or have you forgotten the box's value?" Clara Duval, seated near Dr. Hargrove, clutched her shawl. "I told you, I didn't see who attacked me. Why won't you believe me?" "Because your story's flimsier than a house of cards," Royce shot back, leaning forward. "Midnight walks in a storm. Come now, Miss Duval." Mrs. Bantry, perched on a settee, gasped. "Mr. Royce, that's unkind." Clara was terrified. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze resting on Clara. The young woman's eyes were wide, but there was a calculation behind them, a flicker of something rehearsed. She was about to speak when Dr. Hargrove stood, his face flushed with indignation. "Enough!" he barked, startling the room. "I can't stand this any longer. It was me. I tried to take the box last night." A stunned silence followed. Mrs. Bantry's teacup clattered onto its saucer. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed, and Royce let out a low whistle. Miss Marple, however, remained still, her expression serene but her mind racing. A confession so soon? It was too neat, too convenient. "Dr. Hargrove," Lady Beatrice said, her voice cold. "Explain yourself." Hargrove ran a hand through his beard, his shoulders slumping. I'm a historian, obsessed with artifacts like the jewel box. I thought if I could examine it, study its mechanism, I might uncover its secrets. I went to the drawing room last night, but I panicked and broke the window to cover my tracks. I swear, I meant no harm." Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You? But what about the folly? Someone grabbed me." "I wasn't at the folly," Hargrove said quickly. "I was here in the drawing room. I heard your scream and hid until the commotion died down." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle. "And the white powder near the window, Dr. Hargrove. I noticed it looked like talcum. Do you use such a thing?" Hargrove blinked, caught off guard. "Talcum? No, I don't." "Curious," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, "because it was quite distinctive." Lady Beatrice's gaze hardened. "Dr. Hargrove, are you certain you're telling the truth?" Hargrove's face reddened. "I've said my piece. I'm sorry, truly. I'll leave if you wish." "No one's leaving," Lady Beatrice said sharply. "Not until this is resolved." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, but her mind was elsewhere. Hargrove's confession was a performance, and a poor one. The talcum powder linked to Victor Crane, not Hargrove, and the timing of the folly incident didn't align with his story. He was protecting someone, or deflecting suspicion. But why? She glanced at Crane, who was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. Clara's hands were clasped too tightly in her lap, and Royce's smirk suggested he, too, doubted Hargrove's tale. The room was a powder keg of motives, and Miss Marple sensed the truth was buried beneath layers of deceit. Mrs. Bantry leaned toward her, whispering, "Jane, do you believe him? It's all so dramatic." "I believe," Miss Marple murmured, "that people confess for many reasons, Dolly, not all of them noble." Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, regaining control. "We'll adjourn for now. Dr. Hargrove, you'll remain under scrutiny. The rest of you, carry on, but know that I'm watching." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the jewel box. Its lock gleamed unyielding, a silent challenge. She thought of the note she'd found. "Meet me at the Folly, midnight. Bring the key and Eleanor Langley's letter. The key is my salvation, but it will damn another." Hargrove's confession was a distraction, but it had shifted the dynamics, exposing cracks in the guests' facades. She approached Clara, who was gathering her shawl. "Miss Duval," Miss Marple said softly, "you must have been terribly frightened last night. Did you happen to notice anything at the Folly? Perhaps something dropped in the struggle?" Clara's eyes flickered, but she shook her head. "No, nothing. It was too dark." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. But she had seen the lie, as clear as day. Clara knew more than she admitted, and Hargrove's confession was likely meant to shield her, or someone else. As she returned to her room, Miss Marple passed Crane in the hall. He avoided her gaze, but she caught the faint scent of talcum powder again, stronger now. Her lips pursed. The threads were tightening. Crane, Clara, Hargrove, the key. The jewel box held a sin, but it was the living who guarded it now, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover their secrets before another confession muddied the waters. Chapter 8. The Box's Secret Mechanism. The late afternoon light filtered through the drawing-room's heavy curtains, casting a soft glow on the Langley jewel box. Its ebony surface, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, as if guarding its secrets with quiet defiance. The guests had been summoned by Lady Beatrice after Dr. Hargrove's confession, and the air was thick with unease, like the calm before a storm. Miss Marple sat near the box, her knitting needles idle, her eyes scanning the room with the calm precision of a watchmaker. Lady Beatrice stood beside the box, her hands clasped tightly. "Dr. Hargrove's admission has raised questions," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. "But it hasn't solved them. The box remains locked, the key is still missing, and I believe we're closer to the truth than ever." Victor Crane, slouched in an armchair, snorted. "Closer? All we have is Hargrove's nonsense and a broken window. This is a farce." "It," Julian Royce countered, his eyes glinting. "I'd say someone's getting nervous. Wouldn't you, Mr. Crane?" Crane's face darkened, but before he could retort, Clara Duval spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Perhaps we should examine the box itself. If the key's lost, there might be another way to open it." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Clara's suggestion was bold, and her tone carried a hint of desperation. Was she trying to shift focus, or did she know something about the box? Dr. Hargrove, still subdued from his confession, nodded eagerly. "An excellent idea. As a historian, I've studied similar artifacts. Some boxes from that era have hidden mechanisms, springs, false panels, that sort of thing." Lady Beatrice hesitated, then stepped aside. "Very well, but handle it with care. It's priceless." Hargrove approached the box, his hands trembling slightly as he ran his fingers over its carvings. The guests leaned forward, their breaths held, even Crane abandoning his pretense of indifference. Miss Marple watched closely, noting the way Hargrove's eyes darted to Clara, as if seeking her approval. His confession, she was certain, had been a shield for someone else, and Clara was the likely candidate. "There," Hargrove said, pressing a vine-shaped inlay on the box's side. A faint click echoed, and a narrow panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a matchbox. The room gasped as one, but the compartment was empty. "Empty!" Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, what does it mean?" "It means," Miss Marple said softly, "that the box is even cleverer than we thought." Lady Beatrice's face paled, but she recovered quickly. "A compartment," she murmured. "I had no idea, but without the key, the main lock remains." Hargrove frowned, inspecting the compartment. "There's something etched here. Initials. E.L. and C.R. hard to make out." "Eleanor Langley," Royce said, his voice low. "But who's C.R.?" Miss Marple's mind raced. Eleanor Langley, the vanished heiress, had locked the box in 1890. The initials C.R. suggested a connection. Her lover, perhaps, or someone else tied to her scandal. She glanced at Crane, whose hand had frozen on his pocket watch, and Clara, whose lips were pressed into a thin line. The note she'd found: "Meet me at the Folly, midnight. Bring the key, and Eleanor's letter. The key is my salvation, but it will damn another," were beginning to align, but the picture was still incomplete. "Perhaps the compartment held the key once," Miss Marple suggested, her tone mild. "Or something else, a clue to its whereabouts." Clara's eyes flicked to her, then away. "A clue?" she said, her voice strained. "That's a lot to hope for." "Not at all," Miss Marple replied, smiling. "Old boxes are like old houses, Miss Duval. They keep their secrets close, but they always leave a trace." Royce chuckled, but his eyes were hard. "You're quite the philosopher, Miss Marple. But I wonder, does the box protect a treasure or a crime?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, breaking the tension. "Enough for now. Dinner is at 7. I suggest we all take some time to reflect." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her fingers brushing the box's surface. The hidden compartment was a revelation, but it raised more questions. Why was it empty? And why had Clara been so quick to suggest examining the box? She thought of the talcum powder near the smashed window, linked to Crane, and Clara's key-shaped bracelet. The initials CR were a new piece, and she suspected they pointed to the past and to someone in the present. Mrs. Bantry sidled up, her eyes wide. "Jane, this is getting positively thrilling. A secret compartment. Do you think it's connected to Eleanor's lover?" "Very likely, Dolly," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "But I think the real question is who knows about it now?" She glanced at Hargrove, who was speaking quietly to Clara in the hall, and Crane, who was slipping out toward the garden. Royce watched them all, his smirk a mask for something deeper. The box's mechanism had cracked open a door to the truth, but the key, literal and figurative, was still out of reach. Miss Marple returned to her room, her knitting resumed, but her mind elsewhere. The initials, the compartment, the confession, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and she was beginning to see the pattern. Tonight she would listen even more closely, for the manor's shadows were whispering, and Miss Marple was determined to hear their tale. Chapter 9. Betrayal in their drawing-room. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was a cauldron of suspicion as the guests gathered after dinner. The chandelier cast a flickering glow over the Langley jewel box, its hidden compartment now a silent taunt to those who coveted its secrets. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and mistrust, and Miss Marple, seated in her usual corner with her knitting, felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing against the room's polished surfaces. She watched the guests, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, knowing that betrayal often surfaced when nerves were frayed. Lady Beatrice stood by the box, her emerald earrings glinting as she addressed the group. "The discovery of the compartment changes everything," she said, her voice clipped. "Someone here knows more about the key, or the box's contents, than they've admitted. I will not tolerate further deception." Victor Crane, his face flushed from wine, slammed his glass on a side table. "This is intolerable. You accuse us all, yet you dangle that box like bait. If you want the truth, open it yourself and be done with it." "Careful, Crane, Julian," Royce said, his tone smooth but venomous. "You sound like a man with something to hide. Perhaps you were at the Folly last night, not in your room as you claimed." Crane's eyes blazed. "And you, Royce?" "Always smirking, stirring the pot. What's your game? You're not here for the scenery." Royce leaned back, unfazed. "I'm here because Lady Beatrice invited me. Unlike some, I don't skulk around at midnight." Clara Duval, pale and tense, rose from her chair. "Stop it, both of you! I was attacked at the Folly, and no one believes me. Why am I the one under suspicion?" "Because your story doesn't add up," Royce shot back. "And that bracelet of yours, curious, isn't it? A key-shaped charm, when we're all chasing a key." Clara's hand flew to her wrist, covering the bracelet. "It's just jewellery. You're twisting everything." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady counterpoint to the rising voices. She noted Clara's defensiveness, Crane's volatility, and Royce's calculated prodding. Dr. Hargrove, still subdued after his confession, sat quietly, but his eyes darted between Clara and Crane, betraying a lingering loyalty. Mrs. Bantry, beside Miss Marple, whispered, "Jane, it's like a powder keg in here. Someone's going to explode." "Indeed, Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, "and explosions often reveal what's hidden." Lady Beatrice raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough bickering. If no one will speak plainly, I'll take matters into my own hands. Tomorrow I'll call a locksmith to force the box open." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Hargrove's face fell, as if the idea pained him. Crane's jaw tightened, and Clara's eyes widened, her fingers tightening on her bracelet. Royce, however, smiled, a cold, knowing smile that Miss Marple found unsettling. "You can't do that," Crane said, his voice low. "You said yourself it's priceless. Forcing it could ruin it." "Then give me the key," Lady Beatrice snapped, her composure cracking. "One of you has it, or knows where it is. Eleanor's sin is in that box, and I will not let it fester any longer." "Eleanor's sin?" Clara echoed, her voice trembling. "You keep saying that, but what does it mean? Why drag us into your family's ghosts?" Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "Because you're not strangers to this, Miss Duval. Nor you, Mr. Crane, nor any of you. I invited you for a reason." The room froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Miss Marple's mind raced, connecting the initials in the box's compartment, EL and CR, to the note she'd found. "Meet me at the Folly midnight. Bring the key." Lady Beatrice's accusation suggested a deeper link, perhaps to Eleanor Langley's scandal. But who was CR, and how did the guests fit into it? Before anyone could respond, Clara's voice cut through the silence, sharp and desperate, Fine, I'll tell you. I know about the key. She hesitated, her eyes darting to Crane, then back to Lady Beatrice. I found a letter in the library, hidden in a book. It said the key was buried near the folly, under a rosebush. That's why I was there last night. Crane lunged to his feet. You little fool! You swore you'd keep quiet! Clara rounded on him, her face livid. And you swore you'd protect me, Victor. But you were there, weren't you? You grabbed me at the folly. The room erupted. Hargrove shouted for calm. Royce laughed darkly, and Lady Beatrice's face was a mask of fury. Miss Marple, however, remained still, her needles silent. Clara's revelation was a half-truth, she was certain. The letter she described sounded fabricated, and Crane's reaction suggested he'd been betrayed, not by Clara's words, but by her timing. The talcum powder, the key-shaped charm, the initials, they pointed to a conspiracy, but not the one Clara was selling. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the chaos. Silence! Miss Duval, Mr. Crane, you will explain yourselves fully tomorrow. For now, this room is locked and the box stays under guard. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of anger and fear, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the box. Clara's outburst had shifted the game, but it was a move born of panic, not strategy. She thought of Eleanor's letter. The key is my salvation, but it will damn another, and the empty compartment. The truth was close, but it was tangled in betrayal, and Miss Marple knew she needed one more piece to unravel it. Mrs. Bantry clutched her arm as they left. Jane, did you hear that? Clara and Crane working together. Do you think they have the key? I think, Miss Marple said softly, that betrayal is a powerful motive, Dolly, and someone in this room is feeling its sting. She glanced back at the box, its lock gleaming like a challenge. The night was far from over, and Miss Marple was ready to listen to the manor's whispers, for they were growing louder by the hour. Chapter 10. The Missing Key. The morning after the drawing, room confrontation dawned with a restless energy, as if Thornfield Manor itself were impatient for resolution. The guests assembled in the morning room, their faces drawn, the weight of Clara's accusation, and Crane's outburst hanging over them like a storm cloud. The Langley jewel box, still locked and guarded in the drawing-room, was a silent spectre, its secrets tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly out of reach. Miss Marple sat by a window, her knitting needles moving with deceptive calm, her mind piecing together the threads of the mystery. The note, the talcum powder, the initials CR, and Clara's key-shaped charm. Lady Beatrice entered, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the group. Last night's revelations demand action, she said, her voice cold. Miss Duval claims the key is buried near the folly. Mr. Crane, you seem to know more than you've admitted. Speak, or I'll have the box forced open by noon. Victor Crane, his face haggard, glared at Clara. She's lying, he spat. There's no letter, no buried key. She's trying to save herself. Clara's eyes flashed. Save myself? You're the one who dragged me into this, Victor. You said the box would make us rich. Enough, Dr. Hargrove interjected, his voice strained. This squabbling solves nothing. Lady Beatrice, let me examine the box again. There may be another mechanism we missed. Miss Marple's needles paused. Hargrove's eagerness to redirect attention was telling. His false confession had shielded Clara, but his interest in the box suggested a deeper motive. She glanced at Julian Royce, who lounged by the fireplace, his smirk betraying a quiet confidence. Royce, she suspected, knew more than he let on, and his silence was as calculated as Clara's outburst. Mrs. Bantry, beside Miss Marple, whispered, "Jane, it's like a play, isn't it? But who's telling the truth?" "No one, Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes on Royce. "Not entirely." Lady Beatrice nodded to Hargrove. "Very well, we'll go to the drawing-room, but I warn you all, any further deception will have consequences." The group moved as one, the air thick with anticipation. In the drawing-room, the jewel box gleamed under the morning light, its lock unyielding. Hargrove knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the carvings, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She had noticed something earlier, a faint scratch on the floor near the box, as if it had been moved slightly. It was a small detail, but in her experience, small details were often the key to unravelling a mystery. As Hargrove worked, Miss Marple rose and approached Royce, who was watching the scene with a detached amusement. "Mr. Royce," she said softly, "you've been remarkably quiet today, yet I suspect you have a theory about the key." Royce's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise giving way to a wry smile. "You're a sharp one, Miss Marple. I'll give you this. The key isn't buried at the Folly. Clara's story is a distraction, and Crane's too panicked to be the mastermind. But I'm not the one you should be watching." "Oh?" Miss Marple's tone was mild. "And who is?" Royce's gaze shifted to Hargrove, then back to her. "Ask yourself why a historian would risk his reputation with a false confession. Loyalty, perhaps, or guilt?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over his words. Royce was deflecting, but he'd given her a thread to pull. She returned to her seat, her eyes on Hargrove, who was now muttering about the box's lock. Gay, initial CR in the hidden compartment, echoed in her thoughts, alongside Eleanor Langley's letter. "The key is my salvation, but it will damn another." Hargrove's connection to Clara, and possibly to the past, was becoming clearer. Suddenly, Clara gasped, pointing to the floor. "Look, there's something under the table." All eyes turned as she retrieved a small tarnished key, its head shaped like a vine. The room froze, the air electric. "Is this—" Clara's voice trembled, but Miss Marple saw the calculation in her eyes. The key's sudden appearance was too convenient, and the scratch on the floor suggested it had been placed there. Lady Beatrice snatched the key, her face alight with triumph. "The key to the box! Where did it come from?" "I don't know," Clara insisted. "I just saw it." Crane lunged forward, his voice hoarse. "She's lying. She had it all along." Miss Marple's voice cut through the chaos, gentle but firm. "Dr. Hargrove, you were closest to the table. Did you notice anything unusual before Miss Duval found the key?" Hargrove's face paled, his hands fumbling. No, I was focused on the box." "Curious," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Because the floor was scratched, as if the box, or something else, had been moved recently. And recall you mentioned a family connection to Kent, did you not? Perhaps to the Langleys." The room turned to Hargrove, whose eyes widened. "What are you implying?" he stammered. "I'm a scholar, not a thief." But Miss Marple pressed on, her voice steady. The initials CR in the compartment? Could they stand for Charles Royce, Eleanor Langley's rumoured lover? And might you, Dr. Hargrove, be a descendant with a claim to the box's contents? Hargrove's face crumpled, and he sank into a chair. Yes, my great-grandfather was Charles Royce. He loved Eleanor, but she vanished, and he was ruined. I thought the box might hold proof of their bond. Letters, perhaps, to clear his name. Clara gasped, and Crane's jaw dropped. Royce, however, clapped slowly, his eyes gleaming. Well played, Miss Marple. But if Hargrove's the heir, why, hide the key? Because, Miss Marple said, he wasn't alone. Someone else knew about the key, and used it to manipulate him. She turned to Clara, whose face had gone ashen. The confrontation had exposed Hargrove. But Miss Marple knew the key's discovery was a ploy, and Clara's role was far from innocent. The talcum powder, the note, the bracelet, they pointed to a deeper conspiracy, and Miss Marple was one step closer to unravelling it. Lady Beatrice clutched the key, her voice trembling. We'll open the box tomorrow. Until then it stays locked and no one leaves this manor. As the group dispersed, Mrs. Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm. Jane, you're a marvel. But is that really the key? I doubt it, Dolly, Miss Marple said softly. But it's brought us closer to the truth. And the truth, I think, is about to demand its due. She glanced at the box, its secrets poised to spill. The key was a lure, but the real prize was the sin it guarded, and Miss Marple was ready to face it. Chapter 11. The truth unlocked. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was a crucible of anticipation as the guests gathered one final time around. The Langley jewel box. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the ebony box's intricate carvings. But it could not dispel the shadow of secrets that clung to the room. Lady Beatrice held the tarnished key found by Clara, its vine-shaped head glinting in her hand. The guests stood in a tense semicircle, their faces a mosaic of fear, curiosity, and defiance. Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting folded in her lap, her eyes sharp as she watched the drama unfold. Lady Beatrice's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. This key, if it is the one, will end the mystery that has haunted my family for generations. Eleanor's sin, whatever it was, will be laid bare. Are there any objections? Victor Crane, his face drawn, shook his head. Just open it, he muttered, his eyes darting to Clara Duval, who stood rigid, her key-shaped bracelet catching the light. Julian Royce, leaning against the fireplace, smirked. No objections, but I'm curious to see if this key is the real thing. It appeared rather conveniently, didn't it? Dr. Hargrove, still shaken from his exposed connection to Charles Royce, said nothing, his gaze fixed on the box. Mrs. Bantry, beside Miss Marple, clutched her arm. Jane, I can hardly breathe. What do you think's inside? Something long hidden, Dolly, Miss Marple murmured, her tone soft, but her mind racing. The note. Meet me at the Folly, midnight. Bring the key, the talcum powder, the initial CR, and Eleanor's letter. The key is my salvation, but it will damn another, had led to this moment. She suspected the key was a plant, but the box's contents would reveal the truth regardless. Lady, Beatrice inserted the key into the lock. A collective breath held as she turned it. There was a faint click, then a groan of ancient gears. The lid sprang open, revealing a velvet-lined interior. Inside lay a single item, a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, their edges yellowed with age. The room exhaled. Lady Beatrice lifted the bundle, her fingers trembling as she untied the ribbon. "Letters," she whispered. "Eleanor's letters." She unfolded the topmost one and read aloud, her voice faltering. "My dearest Charles, I cannot bear the weight of our secret any longer. The child is yours, but my family will never accept it. I have hidden the proof in this box to protect her and to damn those who betrayed us. Forgive me, but I must flee. The key is my salvation, but it will destroy another. Yours forever, Eleanor." A stunned silence followed. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "A child! Eleanor had a child!" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The letter confirmed her suspicions. Eleanor Langley's sin was a secret pregnancy, and Charles Royce, the CR of the compartment's initials, was the father. But the proof Eleanor mentioned was missing, and the letters alone were not enough to damn anyone, unless someone in the room feared their exposure. Lady Beatrice's face was ashen. "A child," she repeated. "My grandmother. She never spoke of this, but who betrayed her?" Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "There's more in the box. Look!" She pointed to a false bottom in the velvet lining, barely visible. Hargrove, eager to redeem himself, pried it open, revealing a small sealed envelope. Inside was a single document, a birth certificate dated 1890, naming a daughter, Beatrice Langley, born to Eleanor Langley and Charles Royce. Lady Beatrice staggered, clutching the certificate. "Beatrice! My mother! I'm Eleanor's granddaughter?" The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Crane's jaw dropped and Royce's smirk vanished. Hargrove's eyes filled with tears. His voice choked. "My great-grandfather's child! I knew there was a connection, but this—" Miss Marple's mind raced. The birth certificate explained Lady Beatrice's obsession with the box. It was her legacy, her proof of lineage. But the betrayal Eleanor mentioned pointed to someone else, someone who had driven Edison their child, and the missing proof suggested a cover-up. She glanced at Clara, whose face was pale, her hands clasped tightly. The talcum powder linked. To Crane, the note, and now this. They were all part of a modern conspiracy tied to the past. "Someone hid this," Miss Marple said softly, her voice cutting through the shock. "And someone here knew about it. The key was planted to control when the truth came out." All eyes turned to Clara, who flinched. "I didn't know," she cried. "Victor told me the box held jewels, that we'd sell them. He said he had the key." Crane lunged toward her. "You traitor! You were supposed to keep quiet!" Royce stepped between them, his voice cold. "Careful, Crane. You're not exactly innocent. That talcum powder on the window, your brand, I presume." Crane froze, his face crumpling. I was desperate. The box's contents could ruin me. My family, they were the ones who betrayed Eleanor, paid Charles to leave, hid the child. If this came out, my name would be worthless." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "And you, Miss Duval, played your part. The bracelet, the note, you were Victor's accomplice, But you panicked at the folly, didn't you?" Clara sobbed, nodding. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. Victor promised we'd be rich." Lady Beatrice's eyes blazed. "You both will answer for this, but the truth is out, and my mother's name is cleared." Miss Marple rose, her voice gentle. "The box held a sin, but also a truth. Eleanor's love was no crime, and her daughter's legacy is safe now." The room was silent, the weight of the revelation settling. The box, once a mystery, was now a monument to a woman's courage and a family's shame. But Miss Marple knew one final twist awaited, and she was ready to unveil it. Chapter 12. The final twist. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was hushed, the Langley jewel box now open, its secrets laid bare. The letters and birth certificate had revealed Eleanor, Langley's hidden child, Lady Beatrice's mother, exposing a scandal that had shaped the family's legacy. Victor Crane and Clara Duval stood exposed as conspirators, their greed tied to a modern plot to exploit the box's contents. Yet Miss Marple, seated with her knitting folded neatly in her lap, sensed an unresolved thread in the tapestry of deceit. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, moved from face to face, seeking the final piece of the puzzle. Lady Beatrice clutched the birth certificate, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "The truth is out," she said. "My mother's name is cleared, and those who sought to profit from her pain will face justice. But I want to know how you knew, Mr. Crane. How did you learn about the box's contents?" Crane, his face ashen, slumped in a chair. "My grandfather. He was the one who paid Charles Royce to leave Eleanor. He bragged about hiding her child, said the box held proof that could ruin us. I thought if I could get it first, I'd be safe." Clara, tears streaking her face, nodded. "Victor promised me a fortune. He said the key was lost, but we'd find a way to open it. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Mrs. Bantry, gripping Miss Marple's arm, whispered, "Jane, it's dreadful. But surely that's the end of it." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her voice soft. "Not quite, Dolly. There's one more shadow to bring into the light." She rose, her presence commanding despite her unassuming demeanour. "Mr. Crane, Miss Duval, you've admitted your roles, but there's a piece missing. The key we found was a plant, wasn't it? A distraction to make us believe the mystery was solved. But the real key, the one Eleanor hid, never left this house." The room froze, every eye on Miss Marple. Julian Royce, who had been silent, straightened, his smirk faltering. "A bold claim, Miss Marple," he said. "Care to enlighten us?" "Gladly," she said, her tone mild, but her gaze piercing. "The note I found, 'Meet me at the Folly, midnight. Bring the key,' was in Eleanor's hand, but it was too pristine for a century-old letter. Someone forged it, using her letters, in the library as a guide. And the talcum powder near the smashed window. It wasn't just Mr. Crane's. It was a deliberate clue, meant to point to him." Lady Beatrice frowned. But who would forge a note, and why? Miss Marple turned to Royce, her voice steady. "Mr. Royce, you've played your part well, stirring suspicion, deflecting attention, watching from the sidelines. But you're no bystander. You knew about the box's contents, didn't you? Because you're also a descendant of Charles Royce, just like Dr. Hargrove, and you wanted the proof for yourself, not to clear a name, but to blackmail Lady Beatrice." Royce's face hardened, but he laughed, the sound hollow. "That's absurd. I'm an investor, not a genealogist. You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," Miss Marple said. "The initials CR in the box's compartment, Charles Royce. Dr. Hargrove admitted his connection, but you never did. Yet you knew too much, prodded too precisely. And the key-shaped charm on Miss Duval's bracelet. You gave it to her, didn't you? A taunt to keep her in line while you manipulated the game." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her wrist. "It's true! Julian gave me the bracelet. Said it was a gift, but he told me to wear it always. I didn't know why." Royce's eyes narrowed, but Miss Marple pressed on. "You forged the note to lure Clara and Crane to the folly, hoping they'd expose themselves. You smashed the window, dusted it with Crane's talcum powder, and planted the fake key to force the box open. You wanted the birth certificate, not to honour Eleanor, but to extort Lady Beatrice, threatening to reveal her illegitimacy unless she paid." Lady Beatrice's face went white. "Extortion? You snake!" Royce stood, his composure cracking. "You can't prove any of this. It's all conjecture." Miss Marple smiled, serene, but unrelenting. "Not quite. The real key, you see, is still here. Eleanor's letter said, 'The key is my salvation, but it will damn another.' She hid it in the one place no one would look, the portrait of her brother, in the hall, the one who betrayed her. I checked this morning. It's sewn into the frame's lining." A stunned silence fell. Dr. Hargrove rushed to the hall, returning with a small silver key, its fine design matching the box's lock. "She's right," he whispered. "It was there all along." Royce's shoulders sagged, his mask falling. "Fine," he spat. "I'm Charles Royce's great-grandson. I knew about the certificate, thought it could make me rich, but I didn't hurt anyone." "You hurt the truth," Miss Marple said quietly. "And that's enough." Lady Beatrice clutched the real key, her eyes blazing. "You'll answer to the authorities, Mr. Royce. All of you, Crane, Duval, Royce, will face justice." The room exhaled, the tension breaking like a wave. Mrs. Bantry squeezed Miss Marple's hand. "Jane, you're a genius! How did you know?" "People are like villages, Dolly," Miss Marple said, smiling. "They have patterns, and patterns always reveal the truth." As the guests dispersed, Lady Beatrice approached Miss Marple, her voice soft. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've given me my mother's story, and my peace." Miss Marple inclined her head. "The past deserves its due, Lady Beatrice, and so does the present." The jewel box, now fully unlocked, stood as a testament to love, betrayal, and redemption. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her work here done, but her mind already turning to the quiet of St. Mary Mead, and the next mystery that might find her. Chapter 13. Resolution at Thornfield. The sun broke through the clouds over Thornfield Manor, bathing the gardens in a golden light that seemed to cleanse the shadows of the past few days. The Langley jewel box, its secrets finally revealed, sat quietly in the drawing-room, no longer a mystery, but a monument to a family's truth. The guests gathered one last time, their faces a mix of relief, shame, and awe, as the weight of Eleanor Langley's story settled among them. Miss Marple stood by the window, her knitting packed away, her eyes taking in the scene with a calm satisfaction. Lady Beatrice, now composed but softened by the revelations, addressed the group. "This weekend has been extraordinary," she said, her voice steady. "The box held my mother's truth, and thanks to Miss Marple, it's no longer a burden. Mr. Crane, Miss Duval, and Mr. Royce will face the consequences of their actions, but Thornfield is at peace." Victor Crane, subdued and avoiding eye contact, muttered, "I'm sorry, Lady Beatrice. I let greed blind me." Clara Duval, her eyes red from crying, nodded. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I believed Victor's promises." Julian Royce, his charm stripped away, said nothing, his jaw tight. The authorities had been called, and their fates were no longer in the manor's hands. Dr. Hargrove, cleared of deceit but humbled by his role, approached Lady Beatrice. "I only wanted to honour my great-grandfather's love for Eleanor," he said softly. "I hope you'll forgive me." Lady Beatrice's smile was kind. "You sought the truth, Dr. Hargrove, even if clumsily. There's no fault in that." Mrs. Bantry, bustling with energy, squeezed Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, you were magnificent. I've never seen anything like it, unravelling all those lies. How do you do it?" Miss Marple chuckled, her voice gentle. "It's simply a matter of listening, Dolly. People tell you who they are if you know how to hear them." The group moved to the terrace for tea, the air fresh with the scent of roses and damp earth. Lady Beatrice joined Miss Marple, holding the birth certificate that had rewritten her history. "I always felt a piece of myself was missing," she said quietly. "You've given me my mother, Miss Marple, and my grandmother's courage." "Eleanor was a brave woman," Miss Marple replied, her eyes warm. "Her love for her child was her strength, and it's yours now too." Lady Beatrice nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'll make sure her story is told, not as a scandal, but as a legacy. Thornfield will be a home again, not a vault for secrets." As the guests chatted, their voices lighter now, Miss Marple gazed out at the gardens. The Folly, where Clara's scream had sparked the unravelling, stood serene in the distance. Rico, note, the talcum powder, the forged key, the initials CR, they had all led to this moment, where truth had triumphed over deceit. She thought of Eleanor's letter. "The key is my salvation, but it will damn another," and smiled faintly. The key had indeed saved Beatrice's legacy, while damning those who sought to exploit it. Mrs. Bantry appeared, a scone in hand. "Jane, you must come back to St. Mary Mead with a story like this. The village will be buzzing for weeks." "Oh, I prefer the quiet, Dolly," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "But I suspect life has a way of finding new puzzles." As the afternoon waned, the guests prepared to depart. Crane, Clara, and Royce were escorted to town by the authorities, their schemes undone. Hargrove lingered, sketching the box's carvings, determined to document its history properly. Lady Beatrice waved farewell from the steps, her face radiant, with newfound purpose. Miss Marple boarded the car sent to return her to St. Mary Mead, her small suitcase at her side. As the manor receded into the distance, she leaned back, her mind already drifting to her roses and her knitting. Thornfield's secrets were resolved, its ghosts at rest. But Miss Marple knew the world was full of locked boxes, and she would be ready when the next one called.